We're going to talk not real quick. It's going to take a little while. I've got two talks because this book is awesome. Now, here's what it's a small book. Look, tiny, tiny chapters. There's like 20 chapters in here, 20 chapters in here, 20 chapters, 100 pages. It's a great book. I would recommend don't read it fast because there's lots to it. So chapter 1 was talking about obedience. The chapter 1 is actually called "Do Not Obey in Advance." That got me thinking. So the first thing it had me thinking about was, well, it had me thinking about what does it mean to obey? But anyhow, so the name of the book is On Tyranny, written by Timothy Snyder. Chapter 1, Do Not Obey in Advance. It talks about how people obeying in advance gives the tyrant and gives the supporters of the tyrant a false understanding, or maybe not even a false understanding, but it lets them believe that you're okay with everything they're going to do. Right? So when you obey them, it means that they can go that far. And if you capitulate to this demand, they know that they can go at least that far, and so they'll try going farther. And if you give in to this, then that's how far they'll go. And if you give in to that, then they'll stretch even further. Bottom line is resistance must be resistance entirely. You must resist a tyrant. Now in the chapter, he speaks a little bit about Austria during the 1930s when Hitler annexed Austria. Is that the right word? Anyway, when Hitler took Austria, and he talked about how so many of the Austrians were very excited about it, and he talks about how many of the Austrians were so silent about it. They didn't say anything, and then their silence was actually seen as consent. Your silence implies consent to the tyrant. Because if you were angry about it, you'd say something. Even though there's a threat, if you're angry about it, you'll say something. And which is one of the reasons why tyrants pose such big threats to people. Because I want you to be quiet. Don't say a bloody word. If you're not going to support me, don't say a word. Because if you say a word, I'll put you down. And if I have to put you down, I will do it with a smile on my face. And so people are, well, it's not happening to me, so I'm just going to be quiet about it. Comes back to Niemöllер's poem, right? First they came for the socialists. I didn't say anything because I'm not a socialist. I was silent. The church over the years, in the face of tyrants, has been quiet. And the church, in the face of tyrants, has been incredibly loud. There have been some great heroes who have stood up against tyranny in whatever fashion tyranny may have shown its ugly little face. There have been great Christians, ministers, lay people alike, archbishops, pastors who have stood up in the face of prejudice and racism and injustice and intolerance and allowed them and made themselves heard. But sadly, the church has also been quiet. In today's world, the church, we're not just a place of comfort. We should be a place of comfort, and we should be a place of healing, and we should be a place of learning. We should be a place of spiritual growth. But we should also be a place from which tyrants hear resistance. Must be. Because if we are not going to speak up, then the tyrant as they appear. And this isn't just about the tyrant that we think of Mussolini. It's not just that. There's a tyranny in ideology as well. There's a tyranny. We've been talking about capitalism all day. There's a tyranny to capitalism. There's a tyranny to systemic racial issues and gender-based issues. Those are forms of tyranny in and of themselves. They exist. They're real. They are part of our reality, and we should be speaking up against them, or they will just take it as our consent Our silence being our consent of their actions. Well, they didn't say anything. Well, we should be up in arms over it. And no, I don't mean literally up in arms over it. We should be upset over it. We should be roaring. We should be yelling. We should be marching. We should be seen as resisting tyranny, fascism, oppression, however it shows itself to us. It's a must. When I started this channel a couple of years ago, a few years, it's more than a couple of years ago. I can't believe how long it's been. But when I started this channel and it started taking off, I remember having a conversation with someone who was a pastor in, I want to say they were in like Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, and lovely guy. He a lovely guy. And this was, it was around 2019, I guess. He started speaking out against Trump. And his church had never been political. It had never been, not a very big church, but they'd never been very political. Never had to worry about it. But when Trump was doing some things and I think this was right around the time of COVID, it just started taking off. It just started doing some real significant damage, and people were getting upset with masks, and they were talking about being upset with vaccines and the social distancing and closing things down. And he started speaking up, saying, like, this is okay. It's okay that we're doing this. And he started speaking against those voices who were saying, we got to open everything back up. And you remember that time. Well, the next thing you know, he was told, you keep it up, we don't want you. Right? So there was the threat. The threat was, if you speak up against us, we don't want you. But he had to. He had to. He couldn't be silent. People were going to be hurt. He couldn't be silent. People were going to be harmed. They were going to get sick. They were going to die. He couldn't be silent. They were following somebody into oblivion. He couldn't be silent. But there are a lot of pastors out there, a lot of ministers out there, a lot of priests out there, a lot of preachers out there. There's a lot of religious folks out there. They don't want to say anything because their job's on the line. They don't want to say anything because they don't want to kick that particular hornet's nest. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to stir that particular pot. But we must. Because if we don't say something, that's going to be seen. That's going to be taken. Our silence is taken as consent. It is seen as consent. It is seen that we must be okay with it. And if we aren't speaking against the tyranny believes it can take more, and it can take more, and it can take more. We got to speak up. We got to keep speaking up. And I'll tell you this from where I'm sitting. I get this comment 5-6 times a week. Who the hell are you, a Canadian, telling us in the United States how we're so blah, 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 blah. Well, I'll tell you, if I don't speak up against the tyranny that I see and the oppression that I see, if I don't speak up against the hate that I see wherever I see it, if Canadians are silent about it, if Canadians don't say a word about what we're seeing down south, then those Canadian forces that want to bring about that oppression, they think that they might. They think that they're allowed. They think that it's okay. They think that we consent. Can't have it. Speak up. Speak out. Amen.